That's right. It's the Entreprenhour. Thank you for joining us. My name is Joshua Yankoviz, and today I am here with Ian Werick, a university student at Kansas State. He is studying construction science and has extensive knowledge in sales. Ian, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing excellent, man. Every day I wake up, it's another day to make something happen.
Absolutely.
So, Ian, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of background so we can get some context?
Yeah, so I guess I was originally actually born not far from here in Blue Springs, Missouri. And my parents, when I was young, moved up to Michigan. So I'm technically from the Michigan area, the oldest of 8 kids, actually. So a big family. I went to school up there for the first 8 years. I actually went to a boarding school in Indiana. And then I moved back home after I graduated, went to 1 year of college up in Michigan. And then I moved down here to Kansas. And I've been going to school at Kansas State University for about 5 years now. So,
Right on. How do you like Kansas?
It's not bad. As I tell most people, it's kind of flat.
I don't know what to compare it to. I've never been to a very flat part of Kansas. It's all hills. So people say it's flat only comparatively to mountains.
Right. So I guess I can't speak too much to that, but I think the main thing that I miss is growing up around the lakes is kind of,
I can imagine
not a lot
that.
of large bodies of water around here, but
Yeah, that's true.
no, it's honestly not bad. And to be honest with you, I was thinking about it the other day. Moving after college and what I want to do after that. But I was thinking about it. I was like, it's going to be hard to leave Kansas because I've actually made a lot of good friends here and stuff, and kind of made myself a second home. So, whatever I decide to do afterwards, it's going to be difficult to move for sure. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, we're glad to have you. Good old Kansas. And I'm born and raised in Kansas as well.
Yeah.
So now we're here in KCMO.
That's right. Yeah, and honestly, Kansas City is a great spot. It's kind of like your central hub for a couple different states, and brings a lot of believe it or not, a lot of culture in the area. So.
Absolutely, it really does. I think out of the cities in the Midwest, it is one of the most, if not the most, progressive city.
Yeah,
in the Midwest.
I would agree. I think that you kind of get a melting pot of a lot of different, cultures, types of people, all sorts of, ideas. And honestly, the city itself is pretty, a great spot there's lots to do for any crowd,
And you think about it, like the people who are moving inland, this is the city to come to. If you're coming from the coast, you're coming inward, this is the city to go. If you're going to the middle, trying to move inward.
Yeah.
And it's literally the center almost of the country.
Yeah, and it's only getting bigger, honestly. I mean,
it really is.
It's heck, you got the Super Bowl champions here from last year and stuff. So
indeed we do.
Yeah.
Well, as much as I'd love to dive into that, we are here to talk today about the power of positivity. So why don't you start with your take on that?
When it comes to being positive, you can tell someone to be positive, but what does that really mean? Because as humans, I think we all have a tendency to kind of put a negative spin on anything. Think about, whenever you're, talking to your friends or, talking to your siblings or something like that, it rarely is something. If it's not negative, it's usually kind of neutral. It's nothing really positive. And so I think that naturally as humans, we tend to gravitate towards the negative side of any situation and forget to kind of look at the positive side of things.
Yeah, it's kind of something that we, not inherently, but we kind of almost, and it's not, I don't think it's even natural, but it's like a learned thing from childhood. for some reason. And I know they've done studies on it with how you remember more negative things than positive things. And that's really interesting to me with the way that works in our, in the moment, in the current state of being for everything around you. And so that's really interesting.
Yeah. And I think that, like you were saying, at an early age, it seems to be developed, and it's almost not even our fault, as we grow up, because as kids, we have, our parents, our teachers and stuff like that around us. And those are the people who form us at an earlier age, how we think and stuff like that. And so, and it's difficult because they've grown up the same way. And so they're simply putting that, passing that on. But something that once you realize it, once you know, and you think about what you're doing on a daily basis, as far as putting a negative spin on things, that's when you can start to switch it around, and you can actually start to, well, hey, for example, you take any negative situation, an example of a negative situation. Well, I don't know. I woke up late, I'm not on schedule. Well, at least I can learn that's what I don't want now. So in the future I can correct that. So taking the negative thing that happened, but looking at the positive side, because there's a positive side to everything. You can take a positive, takeaway from anything. That was something I learned this summer. So I worked for a company, Southwestern Advantage, this summer, and it was sales, door-to-door sales, but it wasn't really about, at the end of the day, it was more about, teaching yourself different mentality things. And if there's one thing that they did a great job of, it was kind of making you realize that you're kind of just spinning down this negative track, and that once you realize it, you can actually start to change it. And
once you're aware. Right. And that's something I'd like to touch on with basically anyone I talk to, is self-awareness and the importance of that. Yeah,
it's something that's very important, and as humans, we're always growing. And so when it comes to self-aware, we're always becoming more self-aware if we're consciously thinking about that.
Yeah.
I first started, that self-awareness when I moved away from home, when I kind of moved away from the home up in Michigan and came down here. And it's funny, like every stage that you get to, you think, oh, I finally got it. I have this thing that happened. I had this revelation. I'm more self-aware. This is the maximum self-aware that I can get to. But it turns out, it just, every time it happens, it just builds more and more on you. And that's kind of the nice thing about self-awareness, is that it's constantly growing. You never will reach that maximum potential, in a sense.
Yeah. And I think if people start to think, oh, I've done the work and I've overcome my trauma and I've healed myself, and I'm there, then they're not really there. They're very far from where they need to be. If they begin to think they've made it, we never really make it.
Right.
We are always, like you said, always growing and always progressing our person, who we are.
Yep. Yeah. And I think something that one of my mentors told me over the summer was, when you really think about it, being self-aware, being present, that type of thing, if you really think about it, you'll realize how unself-aware and not present you are. And you'll catch yourself and you're just like, wow.
Yep.
But that's part of the thing. That's another thing, you take the positive spin. It's like, I get to, tomorrow I get to be 1% better, 1% more self-aware, 1% more present with people, with myself. And that's getting better. That's the journey of us as humans, is just progressing a little bit. We're never going to be perfect, but if we're progressing, if we're not going backwards, if we're progressing, then that's what we're looking for. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really cool. Now, reeling it back to the power of positivity, where does that come into play in your daily life?
life isn't necessarily a cakewalk, so it's not easy. And so I think that to keep a good life, a daily good routine and stuff, it's important to keep positivity. There's something, called self-talk, where you're talking to yourself. It's basically the thoughts that we tell ourselves inside of our head.
Mm-hmm.
And usually if you think about them, they're usually negative.
Mm-hmm.
You're usually questioning yourself.
Yep. You got to train it.
You have to train yourself to, positive thoughts. Instead of saying, I'm so self conscious or something like that. It's like, no, you're self-confident, be confident. You are confident. You're the best at what you're doing, just
you're doing your best.
That positive spin of conversation to yourself, again, is back to the, the power of being positive. You'll notice that if you start switching those thoughts inside your head to positive thoughts, whether it's about yourself, stuff like that, you'll notice that in life, you'll have a much more, happy personality, and your personality is going to reflect the people that you come into contact with on a daily basis.
Yeah. And you may not even notice it's happening until you suddenly, someone else might point it out and you'll be like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
When did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
So what does that look like though? How do you switch the thoughts? Like when I have a negative thought and I say, and I'm telling myself something negative,
mm-hmm.
Any thought, even if it's a hint of a thought of, I'm not good enough, anything along those lines.
Right.
What do I do to switch that?
So
in that moment,
I think it's important to really, instead of looking at, obviously I'm not good enough. That is a general statement, but then kind of break it down. Look at your good qualities, mm-hmm. and be honest with yourself. It's not a pride thing.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what you are good at, what you do well. Look at those things. And if you have to, say them out loud. Say them out loud to yourself. And every time that those negative thoughts come to you, repeat those positive aspects.
So literally every single time I have a hint of a negative thought,
yeah.
I replace it by either verbally or mentally thinking the opposite.
Yeah. And I think it might sound a little odd at first. I mean,
until it becomes natural.
Exactly.
And you don't have to do it.
Exactly. So it will seem odd at first. Thinking it, maybe not so much, but speaking it out loud, it's weird. It's weird. Positive self-talk out loud.
Yeah. So something I've been doing is doing positive affirmations and telling myself and being grateful for X amount of money per month. So I've been saying, mm-hmm. Thank you for making $10,000. Thank you for giving me $10,000 a month. Thank you for giving me $10,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not making $10,000 a month.
Right.
Not yet.
But
that's a hard yet.
Yes. And that's the other thing, sometimes manifestation is a real thing. And, whatever positive idea that you have, that you speak out loud, you will speak that into existence at some point. And it sounds weird, positive talk, positive affirmations out loud, speaking what you want into existence. It sounds weird, but
it's very, very real.
Very, very real. And the more you do it, the more natural it becomes.
Yep. And you stop thinking about it.
And then that's when that's the mentality switch,
mm-hmm.
From a negative to a positive. And
something that's significant.
It takes long.
Yeah, it can take a long time. Something that's significant for me in the past year was I suddenly realized that I had stopped giving myself such negative feedback and being, and this is ongoing. Like I'm still dealing with this, but
mm-hmm.
I'm always extremely hard on myself, like very hard on myself. But in the past year, that is like decreased tenfold. And I don't know when it happened. I can't say when it happened, but it just did because I've been doing exactly what we've just been speaking about and switching those thoughts. So it's positivity over negativity.
Yeah, it's super important. And to be honest, I am very hard on myself as well. But yeah, taking that down, sometimes it stems from like a self-worth issue at times. And so again, it goes back to a self-talk where, you're gonna help yourself with that self-esteem, self-worth by using that positive talk. And like I said, it's weird. And I'm only at the point of where, I realize it now, when I start on a negative train of thought, I catch myself now. Like I know when I'm digressing down that negative or just, not positive.
Isn't that interesting? You catch yourself and you, in the moment of lying to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to recognize, that's another part of what happened to me this year, was like realizing that exact thing you're talking about is like in the moment, seeing myself lying to myself and saying, whoa, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And then switching the thought and saying, no, here's all these things that prove this thought that's negative, prove it wrong. I can, say, okay, well, this is a lie I just thought of, and it was about myself. And then I have to think, okay, well, these are all these other positive things that are happening around me that I can say that this lie that I told myself is definitely a lie, and you have to it cancels it out.
Yep. Yeah. And I think the other thing that you kind of mentioned a little bit was the gratitude. That can be a huge, not only positive, but an attitude booster, for if you're going through a rough patch or something, speaking out loud what you're thankful for, anything. It can be the most mundane thing, but that is a huge attitude booster, and it can help so much with, a positive outlook on a daily basis. So
that energy of gratitude, because it made me realize the positive affirmations and the law of attraction and manifesting, all that stuff doesn't actually completely work if you, one, don't believe it,
right.
And two, if you're not, you have to act and think as though those things that you want to manifest are already in existence. Otherwise, the universe doesn't react.
Yep. And it's interesting, scientifically, your brain actually doesn't know the difference between something that has or hasn't happened. It simply receives the signals of you telling it of that reality.
Wow,
so whether or
cool.
not it's happened or not, your brain doesn't know the difference.
Yeah.
And so, which is absolutely crazy. Scientifically, you don't know the difference between something that's happened or not happened. You're simply, receiving that information that you tell yourself. And that's pretty crazy. So
it's amazing. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing we wanted to talk a little bit about, do you think we've covered positivity? I feel like we've gotten a lot out about positivity.
Definitely. I think the biggest thing about positivity is really switching, is the mind switch, realizing the negative trend and then switching that into positive.
Yeah. You'll hear all these terms. You'll hear, paradigm shift and mindset and mentality and all these different words from all these different people and sources, and it's all the same thing. It's all a matter of perception, and it's a matter of how you are choosing to look at it, because you are choosing to look at it a certain way. And if you're choosing the side of negativity, if you're choosing to buy into the news, if you're choosing to buy into what people on the internet are telling you, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, and again, it's
failure in the bad way, not the good way.
Right. Exactly. And you have to be careful with the differentiation between kind of negative failure and positive, because there is, failure that we experience on a daily basis is actually good because we're learning.
Yeah, I love talking about that because it's the power of failure, and it's actually a beautiful thing, because it's always a positive thing when you fail, because it means you did something. It means you tried.
Yep.
It means you had an opportunity to learn a lesson.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like you were saying, it's interesting how our, world today, pop culture, politics, social media and all that tends to just, it's just a whirlwind of negative
It's
stuff.
bombarding
No
you.
matter,
There's no stopping it.
yeah, no matter what race, religion, all of that stuff, it's all just, it's so negative and it's very, very toxic. And if you're, it's why our generation is so depressed. Like why depression has been such a massive issue is because all they're receiving all day from social media and stuff is just negative, negative, negative. And it's sad to see. Honestly, coming back from the summer, having learned a lot about a positive, mindset and self-talk and stuff, you come back and you hang out with old friends and stuff and you just get hit by some really negative, negative stuff. And you're like, wow, that's really bad. Was I like that? Was I really that negative of a type of person, before I kind of realized?
Before you grew?
Yeah, before you grew a little bit. And yeah, it's just there's some people that I like, older friends now that I just, kind of have to cut them off because it's hanging out with them is just depressing.
Wow. That happens.
And, like there are certain people who are, even close to me, that it's hard to talk to them, and because there's always, no matter what you tell them, it's always a negative objection. And it's just like, like it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the opposite perspective there, because I was once that person who was getting left by other people. And I always felt like I was getting left behind. And now that I have grown a little bit, I know that that was because I was not growing at the time. Like people were outgrowing me and leaving me because I was not good to be around. Like I wouldn't have wanted to be around me.
Yep.
And now that's flipped because I've flipped my life, but things are always moving forward. And for me thinking that, oh, woe's me, why are people leaving me? I was in a victim mentality, and I was in a state where I was blaming other people. I was always blaming something else. I was never looking internally. And it's interesting because all the answers and all the wisdom that I needed was within myself. I just needed to look and listen.
You realize, and then you begin that process of unlocking,
and it's painful.
Yeah, it's
really painful.
Very painful.
I mean, there was about 6 months after I got sober, recovering from alcoholism, there was a month in there where I just would cry every other day, where I was just having realizations and connecting dots and connecting patterns that were occurring throughout my life. And I was like making connections to things of my childhood and how they were affecting me like the previous week and stuff like that. And seeing like realizing all the people I hurt and all the things that I did wrong. And that was so painful. I was so full of emotions, and was feeling all these emotions that I had bottled up for years and years and years. All these emotions came back, or not really came back, but came to the surface. And yeah, it's painful. It can be very painful, but it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me.
There's something about self-realization and, coming to that crossroads in a sense. I mean, this summer for me, it was a lot of learning about, how to deal with my self-worth issues. And let me tell you, it was the same thing as, I cried almost, every other day trying to just work through self-worth issues. And I finally, it was reflected in sales. It was reflected in, a weekly, count, I guess you could say. Week after week, I couldn't break through that. And everything had to do with my self-worth issues. And I finally broke through that. One week I just, exploded.
Do you have an idea? Because Gary Vee says that so the self-worth lies that we tell ourselves is learned. Like, we did not make that stuff up ourselves. He kind of implies that it was either given to us by our parents or some other source that made us feel like we weren't worth something or weren't good enough.
Yes.
For me, I have not pinpointed the source for how I acquired all those feelings of just basically
Self-worth.
imposter syndrome, where I just didn't think I was good enough for anything.
Right.
And people would tell me I was good at something and I wouldn't believe it. I would come up with a reason why I wasn't. And even though I'm like looking at something beautiful I had done, I would come up with reasons for why it wasn't good. So I wanted to ask you, like, personally, like, have you kind of pinpointed the source for you? Because for me, I still haven't really figured it out.
Yes. So
I've addressed it, but I haven't figured out where it came from.
right. So mine actually came from, and I want to preface this by saying, I love my parents to death. I'm grateful for everything that they've ever done for me. Even if I don't necessarily, or I didn't necessarily see the reason at the time, I'm very grateful. But as a kid, I think that it kind of came from my dad a little bit. I feel like every kid at some point in their early teens, is a little cocky, a little proud and stuff like that. And so my dad would be like, "Hey, knock it off," that type of thing. I think that, unfortunately, it was kind of hammered into my head so much so that he never really differentiated between self-worth, self-love, and a pride, because they are different, but it's a very thin line. And so I don't think he ever differentiated between the two. So as a result, I was very hard on myself, dealing with, suppressing that pride, because I wanted to take that to heart. It's like, I don't want to be a prideful person. Like, no one wants to be around a cocky, prideful person.
Except other cocky, prideful people.
Exactly. And so I went to great lengths to make sure, I was constantly in my head, thinking about, hey, does this come off as cocky? Does this come off as being prideful? Because, I don't want to be that way. And it built into, suppressing self-worth, self-love, that type of thing, and being very unconfident of myself. And so I think that kind of stemmed. I think it stemmed from my dad. And again, like I said, I love my dad to death. Just kind of how it happened. The other thing is that I think that when it comes to self-worth and stuff like that, you have to be very careful, again, with differentiating between the pride and the actual self-worth.
Yeah, so I can definitely relate to that, with multiple times being told by my father that I was arrogant and prideful and that I was going to have problems for the rest of my life with people if I kept being that way. And at this stage in my life, I know that it's just reflections projecting. Right. But at a younger age, I was told that too. And I really believed it. I really believed something was wrong with me because I was apparently being arrogant.
Right.
And it's interesting that you said there is a thin line, because I never learned to differentiate that either. I was never taught self-love.
Yeah, and I think that a little, as far from a parenting perspective, a little bit of encouragement, the smallest bit with, whatever your kiddo wants to go into.
And I feel like I got encouraged too, but at the same time, it just too many signals.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that I was never taught self-love. I was never taught it in a way that I understood. I can't recall currently moments of being taught it, so I don't know.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, humans in memory. We tend to remember more negativity.
Right. And that's the other thing when looking back into childhood, you tend to sometimes remember some of the negative things that happened when you were a kid. And so, yeah, it can be difficult to kind of pinpoint, like the good things and always gravitate towards the bad things that happened. But again, it's always good to find, once you pinpoint what you're struggling with, to pinpoint where it's coming from. And again, it is a fine line, and I don't think that it was ever differentiated between, because there is a difference. And at an early age, when you're being formed like that by your parents and teachers and stuff, it's very important not only to make sure that, your kid's not prideful, but also that he understands what self-love is. And I think that self-love can be cultivated generally through encouragement and, good job, that type of thing. Like, no, you're doing the right thing. Like, good job. Because, self-confidence is huge.
Yeah. I'm a little torn there because Gary Vee talks about this being like a negative thing, and if you give value to positive comments or negative comments. So if you value people's praise, then you in turn value people's negativity or criticism. So he's saying don't value either. Don't listen to either.
Yes. I guess I haven't listened too much to his take on that, but it does make sense because it's very true. We internalize, everything around us, especially when it's coming from peers, friends, family.
Now he may be referring to like internet comments and people on that are just, whose opinions don't really affect your life.
Right. Well, and that's a whole new level of just crazy, I guess.
True. But I've always taken it as personally, like you can't value compliments or criticism. Mm-hmm. At least that's the way I've interpreted what he's saying. But to each their own, I suppose.
Yeah, I think, again, every person is unique. And I think taking kind of what you need, being intelligent enough to realize what you need, but then taking what you need from other people as far as, feedback, commentary, and taking it and using it to better yourself. Mm-hmm. I think that is the important thing. So if you do need to take some of that, criticism, by all means, take it. I mean, that can also obviously be very important. Mm-hmm. But if you need some of that positive feedback and you need that to help you, then take it and use it as well.
Now, another thing about his perspective is that he says he's never had an issue with knowing his self-worth and valuing his own work. So yeah, people like us, it's a little different.
Kudos to his parents. And obviously, personality plays largely into it as well, because we are born with certain personality traits. And we can obviously change them. But we are born with certain ones. And so, how we're raised, will affect different kids differently.
No doubt.
So, yeah, again, I think that it's not a bad thing to take your personal experience and put it out there, but I wouldn't say you can make your personal experience a rule for anybody else. You can kind of say what your experience has been, and then if people can learn from that, then they will. But yeah, everybody's different, so.
Indeed. Well, we're coming up here. Let's talk about our next topic, which is time management. Mm-hmm. So how would you begin to speak about time management?
For myself, I'm a huge procrastinator. I like to push things off and kind of wait to the last minute, whether it's school, school being the big one right now. But I think that the best way for me to be able to kind of not be rushing and stressing about things. I found that I was stressing a lot early on in college, and it was mainly because I was, goofing around, partying a lot, and not putting priority on why I was there, which was school. And I'm paying for my own schooling, so it's got to be, it's got to be my priority. And so for me, it was the need to create a schedule. I had to have it. And I've only just now really started putting into practice. I use Google Calendar now. I schedule everything out. And for all my classes, for all my big, for my wake up times in the morning, I schedule all that out in Google Calendar, so that I have an accountability thing. Everybody's got their phone with them. So you have your calendar right there. But even early on, 2 or 3 years ago, I was still, taking my class schedule and then writing in different boxes and writing time frames for things. I'm waking up at this time. I'm, going to be, eating breakfast at this time. I'm going to go exercise at this time. I'm going to be in classes at this time. I'm going to be doing homework at this time. And then I'm going to have work at this time. So even if it's just a general schedule, that the schedule is, and I was taught this, schedule is your lifeline. It's going to be how you manage your time. It is the foundation that you build time management on. And
it allows you to have control of your time. Because
right.
if you don't track your own time, then, which I think a lot of people are probably in this situation where their schedule is based on when they're called to go to work, when they are scheduled to work, and that's the majority of their scheduling. But what that does is, just think about it. That means you're not in control of your time. That means someone else is dictating what you do when you do it.
Mm-hmm.
When you, like you said, have your own schedule, have your own planner, you have that for yourself.
Yeah, and the other thing is, when it comes to scheduling things out, everybody wants the free time to do, whatever. Whether it's they want to go out, hang out with their friends, they want to go and do something recreational in the evening, they want to hang out and play video games at home. There's nothing wrong with those things if they're scheduled and put in their place. Because again, everything in moderation. If you have an excess of partying, you're not going to have, you're cutting into your time of whether it's studying, next thing you know, you're skipping
reading,
classes.
Researching.
Exactly.
Working on something, on your own project.
Right. So if you want to have the freedom, on any given day to do what you want with, where you just literally schedule out free time. There's nothing wrong with scheduling out 2 or 3 hours of free time and not labeling it anything, because, you could want to, go hang out with friends in that free time one day, and you could, want to work on your side hustle another day. There's nothing wrong with scheduling out that free time for yourself. In fact, you need it. It's necessary. But you need to have your other things scheduled out as well. And then when you get to that free time, you don't feel like you're wasting it. You don't feel like you're, not doing what you're supposed to do, because you are doing what you're supposed to do. And that's relaxing and doing what you want. And that's equally as important as scheduling out what time you wake up and making your bed in the morning.
And again, that's if you want it. If you want that life of freedom, that's one of the steps you have to take, is take control of your own time.
Absolutely. It's one of the most important things, especially with the way that, Americans in general live. We live at a very fast, quick pace, lifestyle. Jumping from one thing to another. And it doesn't have to be that way if you don't want it to be. Some people like the fast.
We want to make sure that this doesn't, it may sound harder than it is. It is not that difficult to schedule your time out. There are resources, there's apps, there's dozens of scheduling apps and time apps. There's apps that track how long you work on a particular project. One's called Toggle. There's multiple apps and resources that you can implement into your life that make it so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Again, one of the easiest things to use, just on anybody's phone. You've got your Google Calendar, you can use an Outlook calendar, whatever you like, and schedule those things out. And then you can also put events, you can put reminders, for all of these things. It's the simplest thing in the world. It's just, because so many people complain about, there's not enough time in the day. There's plenty of time in the day to get done everything you want and still get 8 hours of sleep.
86,400 seconds.
Yep. You have plenty of time. There's no reason to not get things done. And, like I said, you have plenty of resources and tools to be able to schedule things out and manage your time the way you want. It's just a question of, are you going to sit there for half an hour and do it, schedule it out. So,
right. But that half hour may save you dozens of hours.
Absolutely.
What is some advice from you, Ian, for people who want to start this type of life, who want to take control back from, limbo, if that makes sense?
Don't wait until tomorrow, because tomorrow never comes.
All we have is this moment.
Exactly. And it's called the present, and that's why it's called a gift. Use the time that you have now to get what you want done.
Yep. Time is not a renewable resource.
Exactly.
You can always make more money. You can always get a job. It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
You can always find a way to make money, but you can't find a way to get more time.
Yeah. And again, that's something that I still work with extensively, is just procrastinating.
Yeah, same.
Pushing things off. It's important to use the time that you have now to get what you want done. And so that, your future, you're not worrying about the future because you're doing what you're supposed to do now.
Yeah, I'd say I'm the best I've ever been at not procrastinating, but I'm still not good at it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the most important thing. Again, that goes back to, the power of positivity. If you're getting better at, managing your time 1% or 0.1%, if you're getting better, that's the important thing.
Another thing I like is I think it's called the 5-minute rule, where you just tell yourself that you're going to start something. When you have trouble starting something, when you're procrastinating it, if you tell yourself that you're going to do it for 5 minutes, it's like 9 out of 10 times you will just keep going and doing it and stay on it, even though you only said you were going to do it for 5 minutes. Well, once you got this thing started, it's not that difficult to continue doing it. The hardest part is just starting, and you have to want it bad enough to take that action.
Yeah. Again, it's definitely, once you start it, it's a lot easier. So I'd say just take the plunge, and you'll be thankful. You'll thank your future self, for doing that. So
here's one more thing before we go. If you from 10 years from now walked up to you, what would he tell you to do?
So if my future self, don't be scared to invest. Just because you don't have a ton of cash flow or money doesn't mean you shouldn't be, doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue the big dreams that you have. I think that, I have some big dreams in the entrepreneurial world, and, for my future, what I want, and they're big dreams. And every day I wake up saying, I don't have enough, cash to invest, or I can't do it now. I got to wait until tomorrow. I think my future self would thank me if I, stop procrastinating on something like that and just, take the plunge. Because that's what I want. And also, I think my future self would also tell me to don't worry so much about, tomorrow. Live in the present, live in the moment, stay present, and things will work themselves out the way they're supposed to. If you're doing your best and you're, doing what you're supposed to do, things now will happen the way that they're supposed to, and you'll have the future that you want if you're doing what you're supposed to do now. So
great. Thank you so much. That's really good. And I appreciate you taking the time to come up here. I know you drove, what was that, an hour, 45 minutes to be here. I really appreciate you doing that for today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've really enjoyed it. And again, it's really been a pleasure to come out here and reconnect and talk. It's something I really enjoy. So
great. Well, I, again, am so grateful for you to do that. And I think that today was great. So have a wonderful night. Thank you for listening. This is The Entrepreneur.